Interestingly, you said they are.
Yes.
Or they imagine, or they are thinking outside of the box. So I'm going to change things around and unpack that a little bit. Are you an innovator? And how do you know that?
I know that because I have the scars to prove it. I have the scars to prove it.
Well, you know because you have imagined and then accomplished. I am lucky on many levels, but I get to live in an environment where I'm in charge of creating this place where innovators can make things happen.
This is Innovation Currency. My name is Leigh-Ann Buchanan, and I am your host. What I want this podcast to help people see about themselves is that innovation is for everyone, and everyone is an innovator. I developed a simple test, a quiz, if you will, to help anyone discover their hidden innovation traits from across 4 specific domains: disruptor, connector, distributor, and influencer. If you haven't already taken the quiz, please stop, take a pause, and go by visiting my website, www.leighanbuchanan.com/innovator quiz.
So my name is Tracey Robertson Carter, and I am now I'm an advocate for youth and the environment and for social justice and for all things that right fighters are supposed to do. That's what I'm involved in now. I think you asked, what is an innovator?
Yeah, how do you define it?
I define an innovator as someone, and this may sound canned, but it is someone who has to think outside the box constantly, because you have to create something that hasn't been done, or you have to solve a problem that hasn't been solved. So it's something that it's a constant pursuit. And I think that's why I love being around other people who consider themselves innovators, forward thinkers, people who challenge you. But I guess to answer that, an innovator, I have to say, you truly have to constantly think outside
the box. I love it.
Yeah.
Who are you?
I'm Howard Herring. I'm the president of the New World Symphony. I'm a pianist by training.
Yes.
Which means that I am operating without a license.
But only in the summertime.
Oh, well, in the summertime, I am back to being a pianist, but all through the fall, spring, fall, winter, spring, it's all New World. An innovator is someone who imagines a better place and who begins to pursue it.
I love that.
In the imagining, it's partly what they know can happen and partly being willing to know that it's not fully defined. And in the pursuit, there's ever more definition. They don't know that at the beginning, but they know that as they move forward. Michael Tilson Thomas, who is our founding artistic director, talked about bringing a dream to reality, bringing a big idea down to a realistic place. We certainly have done that at New World, and we will continue to do it. But the act of imagining is where it starts, and a lot of people can do it.
Yes.
But not everybody's brave enough to go there.
So what is interesting to me for you, Tracey, and you, Howard, both of you defined innovators as separate from yourself. Interestingly, you said they are.
Yes.
Or they imagine, or they are thinking outside of the box. So I'm going to change things around and unpack that a little bit. Are you an innovator?
Absolutely.
And how do you know that?
I know that because I have the scars to prove it. I have the scars to prove it. And there's the thing I didn't mention. I'm also I'm a trustee with New World, and I'm a new board chair of ARI. It's an environmental and arts association that's based in the Everglades. But the connection between that, the youth work I've done in the past, being an advocate for young people in detention, is around creating access, right? So when you asked, I'm glad that you said, because I didn't know that I was projecting it to they. Because for myself, it is something that actually, Howard, we just said it earlier, it is, you have to be very vulnerable. It's an exhausting process, but to be an innovator, you constantly have to be thinking around, how can I love what you said, bring a dream or imagine something and bring that dream into reality. And that's something we have to think of every day. And I'm particularly recognizing it's only in the last few months, I'm going to say, the connection between environment, which at that point, you know, the one thing that has no color and does not care about economic status or any of that stuff is our environment. And we are at this ticking time bomb with what we need to do in 10 years in terms of lowering our emissions by about 30% in the next 10 years in order to meet a goal of almost zero emissions by 2050. So these are things that, for me, maybe sometimes I'm trying to wonder why I said they, because I'm constantly
we're going to go there.
Reading. Yeah. So thank you. I'm looking forward to that, because I definitely own that I'm the only one, you know, I'm in a position that I feel blessed that I can be in a room, even a room like this with the two of you, thinking through, talking through, learning, even changing my language around what innovator means and why, and that I'm very squarely in that place. Yeah. But I didn't mean the joking around about the battle scars. I've just said it is a reality, because there is a price to pay for doing things differently. And the price is it's not a bad thing. It's just something that you have to be willing to kind of weather it off and keep going and surround yourself with people that can do the same.
So I guess I'll pass the same question on to you, Howard. So, are you an innovator? And then if so, how do you know?
Well, you know because you have imagined and then accomplished. Probably the reason I put it at distance in my original statement is that I am lucky on many levels, but I get to live in an environment where I'm in charge of creating this place where innovators can make things happen. And at the same time, I've got some big ideas myself. So I get to live in both of those worlds. They talk to each other rather often, at least in my imagination. But if you know that you are an innovator and you're going to imagine and pursue, and you have a chance to create an environment where that can happen for other people, it's a double reward. But that's why I put it at distance, because not just the 87 fellows in the New World Symphony, our video crew, the folks who are imagining what education is going to be online in the future, how we relate to the community. Every move we make is pushing us to a place that is toward the community, that is more fulfilling for individuals, but in relation to, in a relevant place. That requires innovation. If you're going to push yourself out into that territory, you've got to be ready to imagine something different.
And I love this concept that innovation is something that allows you, when you embody it, to not only envision that which has not yet happened uniquely from your perspective, but also to be empowered to realize it. So there's a couple of things that I'm like, I want to go there. But the first thing I want to unpack a little bit with both of you is this idea around the platform with which you are innovating. You, Tracey, immediately went to the boards and the organizations that you support in the capacity as an advocate, a philanthropist, an active person that's passionate about those issues. And then Howard, on the other hand, you immediately went to the main platform that everybody knows you for, which is the New World Symphony, but hinted to some other personal projects. So I'm curious to hear from the both of you, maybe this time we'll start with Howard, is how you see the relationship between the platform that you have to see your innovative ideas and identity come to life, and separately, your identity as an innovator. Are they one and the same? Is there a distinction? How do you draw balance between the space in which you're innovating and yourself as an innovator? And I know that's a complicated question, but...
Well, it is complicated, but let's define platform.
Yeah.
That'll make it easier. I'm imagining several platforms. Let's start with the New World Symphony, because it's easy to define because it exists. One of the platforms is the building itself, the infrastructure that's there, the technology, which is actually an invitation to go to a place that's digital. The second is that education itself is about challenging the past and reimagining the future. One of our phrases is honor the past and shape the future. So the act of education, or the creation of an institution that pursues education in a creative way, in an imaginative way, is a platform. Music itself, right?
Yeah.
This is the ultimate platform, because there's somebody out there this afternoon who's making it all new. And we'll take the three of us and a whole bunch of other people to an incredible place. So those 12 notes on the staff and all of the instruments that come to those notes and are the tools that we use to express ourselves, that's another platform, which is as old as time and stretches way into the future. Your question was about the difference between platform and individual.
Yes.
For an individual, you identify your tools and then you go to work, because you'll only innovate through the tools that you have.
Indeed.
Before we had all of the technology, I came to the New York Symphony in 2001, and in 2002, we mocked up the first online lesson. We did it in 2 separate rooms, student in one room, teacher in the other, and we demonstrated for public school teachers what this might be. They were not enthusiastic about it. All I saw was the future. So the tools that we had, or the platform we were using, the digital technology and the act of educating, it was right there. But then somebody has to see it. Somebody has to, in this case, we imagined it before that you could teach online successfully, even something as subtle as a musical phrase. And then we tried it.
I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Tracey. What I'm curious to think about, though, is you mentioned that we can't innovate if we have not really identified the tools. You can have the idea, but for it actually to happen, you need the tools. How might we make tools more accessible? Because one of the conversations that we've had, like before we started this, and we've had over the years, is when I think about innovation identity, for me, it is a function of a lot of things. One, who you see, who you're exposed to, what opportunities you have, and I want to dig into opportunities later, because both of you mentioned that you have the ability to lead these organizations, and you have the ability to work with amazing, innovative organizations and platforms. But what about those that don't have access? How do we begin to think about carrying through opportunities to innovate when we don't have access to some of these platforms?
I have to put it in terms of, because another part of my life is in the arts, right? And supporting the arts. And I was with a dear friend the other night who is a gallerist and art fair owner. And so one part of access, so we can talk in terms of particularly of Black, Indigenous, people of color, that if we don't support, so in contemporary art, there are a lot of artists that are coming up and in contemporary art, in the visual art form. And once they're at a certain level, they're still what's considered significant is being represented by just a handful of galleries. But there are people like my friend mentioned the other day, Amy Sherrard, everyone knows that name, Cheryl, who did the piece of Michelle Obama for the National Gallery. She was actually represented by an African-American or a Black diaspora gallery. But when she made it, she actually moved to moved to one of the blue chip, let's just call them that. And I want to be clear, I don't know the reasons behind that. It could be literally that the blue chip gallery had the different structures and means to take Amy to the next level. But I use that as an example because when you talk about access, sometimes we have to create it for ourselves. And sometimes, there's this example that, can you imagine that when you have those level of artists And I mean, I could go on and on and on with others that we've seen over the years being in our special place here where our Basel Lammy Beach takes place, is that the level of artists, particularly from the African diaspora community, that are at certain, major levels now. Can you imagine if maybe they had advocated for supporting galleries that maybe aren't traditionally blue chip and are the ones where they began to create their community? And so it just came to mind when you said access, because it's just it's so important that we also look, like, you can look outside, but we actually have a lot of the power within. And I am talking from the African diaspora and this acronym's a lot, but the Black, Indigenous, people
BIPOC.
of color, BIPOC, but from our BIPOC community, that we have a lot of the power already. And that's something that you're speaking about access. I like to also uplift that, because we have the innovation, we have it. We just don't need to keep giving it away. But that's just in this arts space.
The context.
In the context of the art space.
So I want to ask you on a personal level to think back. When is the first time someone opened up a door for you to have access to do something innovative?
I mean, I can answer that.
You start, and then Howard, you get a little bit
it's
thinking.
Okay to go to family. Is
Yes,
that okay?
no, I mean, because
we're all going to go.
Because that's
interestingly,
where
the
it
question is, like, where does it all start? Like, how do we unpack? Like, where did it start for you, and then where did it start for you?
I didn't realize it started for me here until actually I said something on a New World Symphony call just the other day. Because my father would tell me all the lessons I need to learn in the world, you learn on the golf course. And we were talking about something in a group around access, actually, and it was around the preciousness of, the way we look at the symphony, the way you might look at golf. It's not something that everyone can participate in. But back in, not to age myself too much, but I will. Back in, it's okay. Back in the, that would be the early 80s. My father, I was getting trained to be the next Nancy Lopez. And sometimes there's cricket. I don't think with you, there'd be crickets in the room, but Nancy Lopez was pre-Tiger. She was like the first, either the first or I think the first woman of color who was at the top of the LPGA.
One of the things that I'd love for you to develop a little bit more was this idea of who you were training to be, like that. Who was the role model, the prototype that you were seeking to be?
Well, and I have to be fair here. It was my father. I wish I could tell you that my first experience with the visioning for myself at 13 was that I knew I was training to be this. My father saw that in America, anything is possible. And I have to go back, my mother and father came here different times, different ways from Jamaica. So I think I've shared this with you before. My mother came to attend NYU and was one of the 2 women in the Stern School of Business. And she was 16 at that time from Jamaica. But my father came here in the 50s, right around, or late 50s, early 60s, around the time of the Civil Rights Movement, and the arts movement happening in New York. And he came here in the fashion industry, but he was driving a truck. But a little bit of reason I mention him a lot is that he was born in Cuba. Grew up in Jamaica, but born in Cuba. And the reason that's important is that's why he was able to come to the States so easily out of Jamaica versus, my mother and others, your relatives as well, coming here for education and other reasons and being here. So my father, 2 things. He came to America and he always told me the story around that when he came, because he's a Cuban citizen, he got a check or he got money. And he says, when you come to America and the first thing they give you is just a little stipend to say welcome, he's like, you can do anything here.
Exactly.
And then you had these strong Black figures and things that were happening in that time. And I love when I learned more about, and actually going back to art, Gordon Parks would be someone that my father knew because they would be, I'm going to say they're running, they're party acquaintances. You're going to Harlem, you're going to Westchester, these groups of Black professionals and artists. They're all coming of age around the same time in the post or during and post civil rights movement. Then you had that whole age of, all the arts and everything happening in New York. And all I can tell you is that, so I'm a product of these two people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
They're the first point of opportunity for you.
They're the first point of opportunity. By the time we're living in Westchester County, around the corner from a club called Wingfoot Golf Club, and that's where I would take my golf lessons. And my father's vision was that we would travel the world, and he would come accompany me because I would be one of the top golfers on the LPGA.
Yeah.
He did not talk about race. He did not talk about, he did not talk about race. He talked about me being the best player on the LPGA, and that look at this and look at Nancy Lopez, who is a person of color who was the top of the LPGA, and just saying, you can do anything. And he would say to me, wherever you are is where you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And I would hear this when I was a young girl, and I didn't get it. I was like, okay, whatever. That means I'm sitting here. I didn't get it. But when you went on the golf course, and that same golf course, I'm telling you, Wingfoot Golf Club, the reason I was able to take lessons there is that on the public course where my father could play, at this point he's a professional and having a business in the fashion industry and all of that. And but he couldn't join Wingfoot, nor could any of our Jewish friends, because Wingfoot was not, blacks and Jews couldn't be part of the club. But I was able to take lessons there because at the public course, a lot of those caddies worked at Wingfoot, and my father arranged for me to take these lessons. So when you're talking about access, at that point, I am going to these situations that in the early 80s, I'm the only, I'm going to say a woman. I didn't even think about that part actually until right now, that I'm this young woman, a black woman who rides my bike onto Wingfoot, the driving range. And the folks that I'm connected with are only concerned, because it's my coach, only concerned of how I hit the ball, learning the lessons of golf and just focusing on my game. When I would come home from those lessons, my father would say, how was your day? And I would tell him all the things around, like, well, no one looks like me. They all look like this guy, Sorry, like, I don't have anyone to talk to or whatever. I would just complain about, I shouldn't be there. That's not my group. And he would look at me and he goes, that's not what I asked you. I said, how was your lesson? How did you do? And so when you're talking, I hope I can change, because that helped to change my mindset by the time that I'm in other sports. I just never really enjoyed golf, but I love to hit. I can hit and putt. No, I love all that stuff. But I took on other sports. But when I was always the only, like I played lacrosse in high school, and I was always in the paper. And I thought it was because I was really good, but it actually was because I was the only black lacrosse player at that time in Westchester County. Yeah. So I never thought of, when you're talking about access and innovation, I guess just the mere presence of me may have, I hope, maybe inspired some people to take photos. I would always be the captain. That could be for another reason, again. But that early access and my father instilling in me, again, wherever you are is where you're supposed to be, is why I can, I've met Howard. We met years ago, and he was vetting me for the board of New World, and I didn't have a background in classical music, but I would think of, well, what can I bring to this board? And today we are working with an incredible group of innovators, from the fellows and the staff and the trustees, around changing the culture of New World. But again, it always goes back to, that's a room that I know, I know that I never question why I'm in that room. And that's something that starts from that early access. I never question any room that I'm in. Others may question why I'm there, but I never question why I'm there. I know why I'm there.
So there's a couple things I want to unpack before I ask you the same question, Howard, which is, Tracey, you talked about your father being that first door opener for you, that first relationship that allowed you to reflect back the opportunities that you were given to be the first.
Yes.
And I think when we talk about innovation, a lot of times there are people who are opening those doors, that are creating those access points that are actually critical to our identity. We may not realize that it is informing and influencing our identity, but it is doing so along the process. The second thing that you mentioned, which I think is important when we talk about innovators, is this idea of inspiration. Being the only and being the first, particularly when you're not part of the majority narrative, is so critical because it provides a roadmap for people that can see themselves in you who are coming behind you. And you may not recognize the ripple effect. They always talk about the ripple of hope, like that ripple effect, but it definitely, in my opinion, is important to thinking about this whole identity of an innovator, which is having exposure, representative exposure to people who are relevant to your experience. And the third thing that you talked about, which is this idea of being where you're supposed to be. I think there's a lot of doubt, and I want to talk about imposter syndrome in a moment, but there's a lot of doubt around the idea of innovation and being innovators. Like we just saw it right here at the beginning of our conversation. There's this otherness around being an innovator, which if we look at both of your definitions, an innovator is someone who is going to continue to see the idea in their head realized. They're seeing it through. It's an act in furtherance that continues. And so when you have this doubt around, should I be here? That is a point that cuts off the causal chain, I would say, of your ability to innovate. And to really see yourself as an innovator. So like you hit the nail on the head, like a lot of important points as we think about this whole model, this innovation currency model that I talk about.
I'm an innovator, but if I'm being honest with you, I couldn't always call myself an innovator. I've spent the better part of a decade launching and leading projects designed to help everyday people access their innovation potential. It's included projects that have unlocked over $75 million for things that bridge gaps in access, opportunity, and equity. When I transitioned from being a trial attorney to leading organizations in the innovation space, what I really needed was a guide to help me answer two critical questions. Am I an innovator? And what type of innovator am I? The problem is that our society and our own identity serve as barriers to keep our powerful potential as innovators locked away and hidden. Innovation Currency is the book that is designed to help you discover your hidden innovator. If you've ever wondered what innovation looks like for you, how you might use innovation in your day-to-day life, or how you can use innovation to help solve some of the most pressing challenges in the world, or even your workplace or community, then please grab your copy of Innovation Currency, because I can assure you that after reading it, you'll have the tools, the experience, and the translatable skills to unlock your hidden innovator. To find out where you can purchase your copy in whatever format makes sense for you, scroll down to the show notes for the appropriate links.
But Howard, to you, who in your life provided you that first point of access?
My father, like Tracey, who was very important to me, he built his own business out of nothing. Came back from World War II and started a welding supply business in a very humble little concrete block building. And he did really well. So I watched him do that, and he would sell product all day and he would do the books at night, and I would go back to the office with him and I'd do my homework and he'd do his books. So I watched him day to day to day, and first it was him and one other person, and then there were two, and then there were five, and then he kept going. The second person was, I was quite lucky because in the music world, and this is actually documented now, psychologists have taken hold of this for decades. The best thing that can happen is when you're young, you have a nurturing teacher. They make this just part of life, and it's a great joy to go to your piano lesson. And I had such a person, my first teacher, and then she moved away from the little town in Oklahoma where I grew up, and I got the perfect next teacher, who was an incredible pianist, but also quite an intense teacher. And she started to turn the screw down. She made me understand what was required. Her name was Lena Seislove. She grew up in a sod house in Oklahoma. She was born at the turn of the century. She went to Chicago because there was a particular teacher that she had there in a junior college who recognized her talent. So they put her on a train and sent her to Chicago. She came back and spent the rest of her life teaching us. And there are 5 or 6 of us who went on and played professionally. But she was the one who really kicked the door open and made me understand, here's the process. You must follow this process. And if you do that, good things will happen. And sure enough, they did. So she was, from a musical point of view, she was the one. There was one other person who taught me how to raise money, who, when I had an idea to start a festival, there were 5 of us in the chamber ensemble, I saw this opportunity, and I explained that I couldn't make the numbers work, that there was no way for the players to get paid and do all the advertising and renting the pianos, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, we can accomplish this. He said, it's actually not too hard. We'll raise the money. And I said, I don't know what that means. And he said, the process is simple. You will, in a room, let me tell this story properly for the camera. He explained to me that it was a relatively simple process. We would get the right people in the room. I would spin the dream. He would explain their responsibilities. We did it on a Sunday afternoon. We walked into the room with no money in our pocket. We walked out of the room with enough money to begin the process. So in each one of these cases, this is all of this was in my hometown. I came from a place where people could buy into a dream and they could follow someone who had a big idea. And I got to do that as a kid. So each time you do it, it's another big challenge. I remember talking to Frank Gehry the very first time and thinking, who the hell let me in this conversation? And Frank Gehry, in those early days, saying to all of us, to Michael and myself and the rest of the team, the harder you challenge me, the more questions you ask, and the more you push me, the better this building will be. If you lay back, the building will suffer. Come at me. And we learned how to do that, and we had to teach ourselves. He helped us. But again, you're sort of going back to imposter syndrome. That was, for me, that was significant.
And I know this, and Tracey knows this, but how much did you have to raise to get the New World Center?
$160 million.
So it's important, right?
It's a big number.
Because it's a big number. I will and you may not know this, but when I first had to think about fundraising, a lot of what I tried to put in practice for the first $1 million I raised was from our conversation when we had lunch.
Well, there you go.
and what's interesting to me about what you just shared, unpacking it. First, there's a proverb that says your gifts will make room for you. And when I think about the innovator identity, we often don't focus on leaning into our talents and our gifts. If you think about your success, it's in music and in fundraising. And I'm going to ask you what your superpowers are. But if I had to name your superpowers, Howard, talented musician, so you're musical, an amazing fundraiser, but not just raising money. It's really about understanding the responsibility of resources, right? I think that's one of your superpowers.
That's right.
And then the third thing, I think, is really around what's the same superpower I have, which is connection. Yes. It's not just people, but connecting concepts, which allows for you to do very innovative things. And so when we talk about this who is an innovator, I think a lot of it has to do with leaning into your talents, your superpowers. And if I hear your story, the areas of access that you mentioned were all around your superpowers.
Yep.
Starting with music.
That's true.
Then you wanted to have a festival, which no one had ever done before, but you wanted to do it. And then you were able to connect with the right people to teach you how to communicate the responsibility of resources.
That's right.
So Tracey now. Ooh, hard question. What do you think your superpowers are?
Absolutely.
I bet we could probably.
I know.
The other ones, but the first, the strongest.
Like 3. Like, what are your top 3 superpowers?
Definitely number 1 is being a connection. I know that. I've been told that, and I didn't know it was a power. I thought it was just something naturally. And you're right. It's not just connecting like, oh, we know each other. It's connecting the idea to maybe something, someone, some engine that can scale something up. And that's something I didn't know it was a superpower. And I'm very proud to say that the calls that I get from just some young professionals now in the nonprofit world who are, whether they're doing their own things or they call me to say there's something I said or someone I connected them with that it went to another level. I even went to an art fair once and there was a panel happening and they looked at me. I was just walking by and, enjoying watching 2 friends speak, and they thanked me for introducing them and making this it's not just, I'm going to say like text like you would do, like you need to know this person, I need to know this person. The rest, the things that come to mind, because I think in this part of my life, I haven't been, I used to be a serial entrepreneur. So you may not know, I don't know if you'd know this, back in the day, before I went to Levi's, and before that, my parents were the North American distributors for all of Giorgio Armani. So it's the manufacturer for Giorgio Armani is a company in Italy called GFT. It's also just a great story because that happened on a handshake. But because, and I grew up in a warehouse full of garments and the Garmento era. So where you say, I like that jacket, I'm going to make 50,000 of them, and they would be shipped to New York, shipped to my parents' warehouse, and then you hope that Federated would buy what they need to buy, whatever. And I don't know if you need it for this, but what's interesting is that my father, I unwittingly, because I think it fits into what I'm about to share, is that when you couldn't sell the 50,000, he would buy back that jacket, take the Armani label out, put a different label in, and open an outlet, which is what's called an outlet now. Yep. But I'm just saying, let's just call it Jamaican, so those were the first, and Dollar Bills and Men's Warehouse and all those guys, those are all guys that the first shipments of the things they would get would come from my father, but it wasn't something that I don't want to take away from. I loved him dearly, but I think some of these things were like, well, all right, well, you're not going to sell them. I'll buy them. Let's keep making some money off of this stuff. Yeah. Right. So I want to say that theme goes into, you'll have to tell me this next superpower, because I can see opportunity and I can see it, and I don't know if this is, but there's a tenacity about the way that I go about things that maybe my mother would say that's my other superpower. It could be used for good, not for evil, but it takes up a lot of time, and you have to make sure you have your priorities straight, which is, I'm going to go back to why I said the thing around the battle scars, because in terms of doing and being innovative and getting to that goal, you definitely can't lose sight of where your priorities are.
Yes.
Because you still have to take care of yourself, your health, your family, those things that are number one. But I would say that the reason I shared that story is that when I see something, I seem to be able to achieve that.
Yes.
And I use all of the tools that I have to get there. So my first company was a hemp company, that I did a lingerie line. And I did this over, my daughter was born in 2000. So from 98 to 2000 is when I was doing this, and it was called OSO. And now you see that CBD and actually other things, now it's become part of what we do. And I'm sure it's going to become something that that world, alternative fabrics and things are stuff that we use. But back then it was still a little taboo. And I did this line, and I always envisioned it. I can envision what I want. And I envisioned it being a line that would be sort of a luxury organic line.
Yes.
That typically that's not where things were. You would be sort of relegated to like a fair or something that's but I always saw that we would be in Barney's. So going back to, I knew how this goes. I knew I'd be in Bergdorf's. I wanted to be in I. Magnin, which is no longer, but and then I also knew about some Takashimaya, these companies that similar ones that would be in Asia, and we came out with this line, and Elle magazine did an article, a full page and I was still just putting tags on, it was lingerie, so tags on panties in a loft that we lived in San Francisco, and Elle magazine comes out. And my friends who are, they're like, Tracey, your name is in Elle magazine with a full spread of this line that you're doing, which we know that you were just coming out of sampling to, I did all the work to get in, but, we ended up in Barney's, we ended up in iMagnet, we ended up in Takashimaya. Not at the numbers I'd like to be at, but we ended up there. And those are things that I know that goes back to using those tools, envisioning where I need to be. And then there's a number of things that it would make this interview way too long, but
you have another superpower.
Oh, what is it?
Which is that you have an elegant, gracious way of asking people to do the right thing.
Oh, wow.
You did. I've watched you do it over and over again.
So
I count on it.
Okay.
Talk to us about an example of that. Because I think when we talk about innovation, and I think this comes together, I always think about innovation, but to what end? Personally, and this is biased, I think that the purpose of innovation is to solve problems that relate to the human condition. It's not necessarily for selfish gain or self-fulfillment. I think that you get the gifts, you get the opportunities, the doors open, the stars align, the vision comes to pass for a purpose that often is greater than yourself. And so when you talk about Tracey's superpower, and I've seen it because we've had many conversations, being that very subtle, very gracious, but definitely not shy way of saying, this is not acceptable. How might we, when you know better, you do better. We know better, so let's do better. So talk to us about an example of that.
Well, this is going to lead us back to access, which we really need to spend some time there. We have now for probably 7 or 8 years been quite intent on trying to look beyond the players who would come to the New World Symphony, the prospective fellows, and our desire there is to reach out across the population and find talent where talent is, and let talent then be developed. Now, all of that was brought into direct and dramatic focus with the murder of George Floyd. So what we did before is what we did. What we're doing now is a very different and more important initiative. And in those conversations inside the institution, fellows, trustees, staff, this is tough conversation. Mm-hmm. Everybody has to set aside a good bit of what they thought they knew, embrace something that is beyond what they had imagined before, maybe innovative. But somebody has to call the step. Somebody has to spin the dream. Somebody has to ask the right questions. And the way the question is asked, very often by Tracey, will lead you to a place where you are better than you were before. Mm-hmm. So she has that skill. And I've watched her do it in these institutional, sometimes small committees, sometimes institution-wide. It's even harder when you're only on Zoom. Right? Yes. One day we'll be beyond the pandemic and somebody will be listening to this video and say, what's he talking about, Zoom? But we have been apart from ourselves, isolated. It makes it even more difficult to have those conversations. But asking the right question in the right way is something that she's very good at.
So speaking of asking the right questions,
sure,
I'm ready to ask you guys a quick round of questions. Oh. Are you ready?
Yep, ready. What do we get? Flavor paper. Like, what are we?
You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
So very quick answers. When do you feel most in flow?
At the golden hour in the morning.
What is about the golden hour?
That it's the one time for me prior to about 6 a.m. that the whole world to me is the way it's supposed to be. And I have a moment to just reflect and take a moment, and it happens naturally. It's not something that I've written on a calendar. or made this like this is, but I know that I need that time in the morning to just be. And sometimes that just being leads me to very innovative thoughts. Sometimes that just being allows me to just feel and be vulnerable, because the day ahead could have whatever challenge or whatever opportunity that's coming ahead. But yeah, I love, I call it the golden hour. I think most people call the evening the golden hour, but I love early morning.
Love it. Howard, what about you?
So early morning is important to me too. Things are fresh and clear and clean. I very often, if I have a problem that I'm trying to solve, I will write about that problem. So it's morning and it's writing. But one of the things you learn to do as a pianist, as a musician, is to plan your practice time. In the early days, you just sit and play, and then all of a sudden you realize that you're kind of wasting your time. So there are also these moments where I have to pull back. I must do this in order to move us forward as an institution. So, and in those planning times, sometimes it's only 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be a long period of time. But you got to learn how to get quiet.
The quietness. I always say that for me, it's in front of a whiteboard.
Interesting.
When I'm brainstorming, because it just comes out. So last question. I know we could go on forever. I feel like we need like a part 2 of this.
Yeah, we do.
Why does the world need innovators?
I think, well, I can tell for me that the sigh is because we desperately need to reimagine what it means to be human, what it means to live in society together, what it means to truly create equality for all. And I feel like that sounds like a pageant answer, as they would say, but it's that simple. I sometimes find that I'm using in sentence structure a lot the word human, like sometimes it's just not, that's not something us as humans that we would accept. And so I believe that's why we need innovators. That's why we need forward thinking, outside of the box, dream, imagination to, the dream to reality, cadre of folks that we move forward in leading people to what it truly means to be human and to build a better society, because we need it right now.
Mm-hmm. Howard?
It's a really big question.
That should not come as a surprise coming from me.
It does not come as a surprise. I think of 2 reasons. One of them has to do with self-determination. Individuals need the chance. They need to be able to go there, first in their minds and then in their actions. As far as society is concerned, we've had some innovations that worked and some that didn't. But we are, as Tracey says, in a very complicated moment. And it's not just the pandemic that's done it to us. So how we find a way to get beyond some of the innovation that has harmed us as a group of people and get to a better place. It's sort of, I guess it's innovation that has a human implication.
Yeah.
Right? This is, we got to get to that place, whatever that means. I'll give you an example. So the mission statement, the vision statement of the New World Symphony is that we believe in a strong and secure future for classical music. We will reimagine, reinvent, express, and share its traditions with as many people as possible. And it's that last phrase that tells you that we are pushing ourselves into a different place and demanding of ourselves that we innovate our way to the sharing of the music with as many people as possible. We need a lot of that because it will take us to a better place. We've seen it a little bit, but we know that there's a lot more to be done. So I think it's for the individuals, but also for the society. And I do want to say before we finish, as we were talking informally before, this issue of access is enormous. Talent is randomly distributed. You have to go find it. You have to take care of it. You have to be gentle with it. You have to prod it, push it, encourage it, reward it. And it is out there. And for us to live in a society that does not acknowledge that, which is where we are right now, means that 6-foot-high, blue-eyed white men like myself get a better chance. And we got to get beyond that.
I think the reason why I decided to focus on innovators and not innovation and institutions is because people are, as we talked about, at the center of this currency of innovation, right? People are really the ones who are the missing link. And it is people, when focused on the most pressing challenges that affect the human condition, to use your word, that's what's going to make the world better.
Yes, it is.
So thank you so much for joining me, both of you, in this conversation.
Good.